What kind of man invites his friends, nobles, and loyal followers to a grand feast, only to seal the doors, raise a cup in their honor, and watch as every single one of them is slaughtered before the night is through? Is that the act of a madman, or a king who understood power in its rawest, blood-soaked form? This is the story of Eric XIV of Sweden, a brilliant yet unstable monarch whose reign was marked by ambition, paranoia, and one of the most shocking betrayals in Scandinavian history, known to us as the Massacre of Uppsala, a night when the king himself turned a banquet into a slaughterhouse. Eric was born in 1533, the son of Gustav Vasa, the great liberator of Sweden, the man who had broken the nation free from the grip of Danish rule. Gustav was not just a king, but a founder, building the very framework of modern Sweden on the ruins of medieval feudalism. His rule was ruthless but effective, and his children were raised in the long shadow of his power. Eric was intelligent, educated, and ambitious. He mastered languages, studied politics, and dreamed of Sweden as a northern empire stretching across the Baltic. But from the beginning, there were cracks in his mind. Those who knew him described him as brilliant but unpredictable, a man of sudden moods, fierce passions, and dark suspicions. When Gustav died in 1560, Eric ascended to the throne. His coronation was celebrated with grandeur. He was not content to be merely king of Sweden. He claimed Finland, Estonia, and the lands of the Baltic as his inheritance, styling himself as a monarch of vast dominion. But ambition alone could not secure his crown. The Swedish nobility, powerful families with long histories and vast estates, remembered a time before Gustav's heavy hand. They wanted influence, they wanted power, and Eric feared them for it. Among the noble families, none stood higher than the Stures, whose lineage stretched deep into Swedish history. They had led armies, governed provinces, and at times had been as powerful as kings themselves. To Eric, they were not loyal servants, but dangerous rivals. His fears were stoked by his closest advisor, Göran Persson, a cunning and ruthless commoner who whispered constantly in Eric's ear about conspiracies, betrayals, and plots. Whether those plots truly existed hardly mattered. What mattered was that Eric believed them. The years that followed were filled with tension. Eric distrusted his half-brothers, John and Charles, both of whom harbored ambitions of their own. He dismissed noble advisors and turned to astrologers and alchemists for guidance. He saw omens in the stars, threats in every shadow, betrayal in every smile. And all the while, he dreamed of securing his throne by any means necessary. By the spring of 1567, Eric was convinced that the Stures and their allies were conspiring against him. He resolved to act not with open war or trial, but with deception. He invited them to Uppsala Castle, under the pretense of reconciliation. He promised friendship, peace, and forgiveness. A banquet was prepared, with the hall decorated for celebration. The nobles accepted, for who could refuse the hand of their king? The night began in splendor. Torches lined the walls, the smell of roasted meats and spiced wine filled the air. Musicians played as nobles in fine dress gathered around tables heavy with food. Laughter echoed through the chamber, goblets were raised, and the appearance of peace seemed real. But behind Eric's eyes burned suspicion, and beneath the stone floors of the castle lay the weight of his decision. He would not let them live alive. As the evening wore on, Eric drank heavily. He paced the hall restless, his eyes flicking from face to face. To his fevered mind, every smile was a smirk, every laugh a signal of mockery, every toast a veiled insult. Finally, something inside him snapped. He ordered the doors locked. Guards took their positions. The nobles, confused but trusting, had little time to realize what was happening before the nightmare began. Eric's fury turned first on Nils Svantensen Sture, the youngest of the family, a man whose very presence seemed to ignite the king's rage. Without warning, Eric lunged, drawing a dagger and stabbing him repeatedly. The hall erupted in chaos. Guests screamed. Some tried to flee but found the exits barred. Others pleaded for mercy, but mercy was not in Eric's heart. Guards, loyal to the king or terrified of defiance, drew their blades and fell upon the nobles. Steel clashed, cries rang out, and the banquet transformed into a slaughterhouse. Eric himself joined the killing, striking at men he believed conspired against him. Svante Sture, the patriarch of the family, was cut down. Other nobles fell, one after another, their fine clothes soaked in blood, their bodies collapsing onto the feast they had come to share. What had begun as a gesture of peace ended in horror. The tables were overturned, goblets spilled, candles extinguished in the frenzy. The music was silenced, replaced by screams and the sound of death. When it was over, the hall was unrecognizable. Bodies lay sprawled across the floor, the rich scent of food drowned by the iron tang of blood. The air was heavy with smoke and death. Eric stood among the carnage, not as a king dispensing justice, but as a man consumed by his own madness. He had destroyed his enemies, but in doing so, he had destroyed himself. News of the massacre spread swiftly across Sweden. The nobles who survived carried tales of the bloodshed. Rumors flew that the king had lost his mind, that no man could trust him, that he was a tyrant who had betrayed the sacred bond between ruler and subject. Eric tried to justify himself, claiming the Stures had plotted rebellion, but few believed him. The spectacle of the banquet was too brutal, too shocking, too personal. It was not justice, it was butchery. The weight of guilt fell heavily on Eric in the days that followed. Some accounts say he wandered the countryside in despair, weeping and incoherent, haunted by visions of the men he had killed. Others claim he grew more erratic, lashing out at those around him, unable to face the reality of what he had done. What is certain is that the massacre broke him. Whatever authority he had once commanded was now stained beyond repair. The nobility turned against him. His half-brothers saw their chance. In 1568, John led a rebellion, gathering support from nobles who could no longer tolerate Eric's rule. The rebellion was swift. The king's forces faltered, and Eric was captured. He was stripped of his throne and confined, a prisoner in his own kingdom. For nearly a decade, Eric lived in captivity, moved from one castle to another, watched closely, feared and pitied in equal measure. His madness deepened. He spoke to phantoms, trusted no one, and lived in the shadow of the massacre he had unleashed. In 1577, he died in prison, officially from natural causes, though many believe he was poisoned, perhaps with arsenic, slipped into a bowl of pea soup. Eric XIV had begun his reign as a man of promise, a learned king with vision for Sweden's future. But ambition without balance, suspicion without evidence, and fear without restraint turned him into a tyrant. The massacre at Uppsala became his legacy, remembered not as a triumph of power, but as a descent into madness. The memory lingered long after his death. For the nobility, it was a warning of what happened when kings forgot the line between justice and cruelty. For the people, it was a reminder of how fragile power truly was. Eric's brother John, who succeeded him, ruled with greater caution, but he too lived in the shadow of that blood-stained feast. So we return to the question with which we began. What kind of man invites his guests to a feast and slaughters them at his own table? Eric XIV of Sweden was not merely a king, nor merely a madman. He was both, a ruler of great promise and great terror. His banquet of blood remains one of history's most chilling examples of how paranoia can twist the mind, how fear can devour reason,
and how a single night of madness can define a man's entire reign.